All right, I'm going to just give you a few pictures and just
Okay.
ask you what they are and
All right.
to talk a little bit about them. So here's one.
Oh yeah, this one, my grandfather Peter, who you have a name of. You're Harry Peter Littman. That was Peter Perlow, and he's with us. He and my grandmother took Ruthie and me. We lived in New York. We did. They had moved back to Pittsburgh by that time. They being my grandfather, and he's walking with us on the boardwalk. And there I am in my regulation coat with the brass buttons, and we have our hats down on our faces so nobody can tell who we are. I do not know why we had to wear hats down so far on our heads, but that's what that is. And I look like I'm probably about two.
Here's
So
some more hats. Speaking of hats,
Jim must have thought we'd catch cold in that. Oh,
right.
yeah. Yeah. Now, this is my Uncle Murray. My mother had two brothers, Murray and Ben. Murray was the youngest. Mother, Uncle Ben, and Uncle Murray. And he lived with us until he got married. And that's my Uncle Murray.
Oh, he lived in your guys' apartment.
In our apartment, yeah. Uh,
Why
my
not?
uncle,
Why not with his parents?
well, they moved back from New York to Pittsburgh, and he stayed
Nice.
in New York. So it's my Uncle Murray, my grandmother, Bessie, my grandfather, Pete, and my mother. And here we are on the boardwalk. And Ruthie and me looking all dressed up and covered so the elements couldn't get to us. I don't know, but that's
How do
us.
you know you're on the boardwalk?
I just remembered that trip.
You remember this?
Yes,
That's remarkable. And which boardwalk?
Atlantic City.
All right, who do we have here on that picture?
That is my great-grandfather. Now, I tried to explain. My great-grandfather and great-grandmother, who spoke Yiddish, we called Zadie and Bubby. So to me, Zadie and Bubby means great-grandfather. My mother and father's mother, Bessie and Peter, we called Grandma and Grandpa. So we never called them Bubby and Zadie. My grandmother probably wouldn't have liked it. She was not fancy enough
She was
for
a
her.
fancy woman, your Bessie.
The fancy woman doesn't sound right. But she was quite elegant in her way.
She had an aristocratic
Yes,
way about her.
yes, very, very. So anyway, that's my great grandfather and my great grandmother, his wife, my father, and Ruthie in front of my father. Ruthie looks just like my father, and my mother next to Zadie, and then me in front of her.
So you think Ruth looks like your dad, and you
Yes.
look like your dad's mom? Was that?
I look like my dad's sisters or moms. Yes, I understand. I didn't really know them. That's why at Ida's house, the one that later became Route 22.
Nice house.
Yeah.
Okay, these two.
Oh, this is me in my last year of grade school, I think. Looking quite softig.
You look happy.
Yeah, well, I think I was happy. I was a happy kid.
Did you have a sunny disposition, would you say?
I think so, yeah. Aside from when my sister took me aside to tell me how we were poor and that we lived in the apartment not of choice but of necessity, I thought we had everything we wanted.
Well, now what about that? I mean, we're in the heart of the depression in your youngest years. Did you ever
I
have
never
any
felt
consciousness of it?
I never felt as if I were deprived. I did know that if I was going to a special event and I had to get a special dress, my mother would kind of conspire with us. She'd say, "All right, now, girls, I'll have to ask Daddy about this, but we'll do it, at a good time." And I'll ask him, and I think he's going to say yes, but I'm not sure. So I knew if we were going to a function, I had to have something special. We had to ask my daddy.
And if you were going to a function getting something special, would you buy a dress or buy material?
No. No. My mother did sew, but not dresses and stuff like that. Although she did sew underwear for us when we were very little, I remember that. but no, we shopped at Macy's, and later on in life, my mother got a job at Macy's. She sold hats at Macy's department store.
Apart from not feeling deprived yourself, do you recall any, and do you have any memories of the Depression, that it was the Depression and other people were out of luck?
You know, that's interesting. I've given that topic a lot of thought myself, because I know if I would hear the year 1934, I know that's the Depression. When I went to see the FDR Memorial, I saw, I don't know if you've ever seen this beautiful memorial of men on a line, a hunger line, waiting to go in and be given food. But in my recollection, when I was a kid, when I was living it, I didn't have any sense that we were being deprived of anything. Now, there were a couple of things that I do remember kind of vividly. When the war started, World War II, there were ration books. And I remember being given ration books. Everybody in the family had one. And there were little stickum things for sugar, butter, and I think meat was limited somehow, but I don't remember how. So I know we had ration books. I must have been aware of that. And I wasn't a dumb kid, but I somehow never focused on the fact that we had to generate money, that there had to be working. Now, I did know my father, we were aware that my father worked very hard. He had 2 jobs.
What were they?
Well, the one job was he sold men's clothing at Gimbel's, downtown, uptown, I called it, in Manhattan. He was supposed to be like the fabulous salesman. He'd come home and he'd tell me stories about this guy came in and he brought his wife. That's a bad thing to bring. But many days he didn't miss a sale. And I mean, sometimes he'd come home and I'd ask him, "Did you miss any sales today?"
And what did it mean to miss a sale?
That he waited on somebody that didn't buy something, but everybody else that he waited on that day bought.
And you were
Which is
starting to tell a
incredible.
specific story about a man coming in with his wife, or do you?
No, that wasn't a specific story. But so I remember that. I remember
What was his second job?
his second job was selling men's clothing on the Lower East Side on Thursday nights and on Sunday. So other kids' fathers were off Sunday. My father worked Sunday, and he worked Thursday night. So he really
What kind of
worked
store
hard.
on the Lower East Side?
Lower East Side men's clothing store, but a lot more schlock than Macy's. And of course, my mother went to work. After my grandfather died, as I said before, my grandmother moved in with us. That increased expenses, and I feel sure that my mother went to work as a result of that additional burden financially. So first, she worked for a lady who had a shop right across from us. You asked me before about streets I lived on, and I started telling you Ocean Avenue. There was Ocean Parkway, and then we moved back to Ocean Avenue. But on Ocean Parkway, when we lived there in an apartment building, across the street was an apartment building where there were some little storerooms in the bottom. That was not uncommon. Doctors' offices were very common on the first floor. You'll still see that in New York when you go to New York, physicians' offices. So my mother got a job working for this lady who made hats. And so my mother learned a lot about hats, and she went into the hat business when they moved back from Pittsburgh. But anyway, she started working there, and then she moved to Macy's and had a regular job. So my mother became part of the subway takers in the morning when they went to work. And even my sister, when she was 16, got a part-time job at Macy's. I was dilettante. I discovered that I could make more an hour doing tutoring in math or in some other subject than if I worked in Macy's, for a whole day. So I did that.
Who did you tutor?
I can't remember the little kid's name. He was a sweet, nice little kid. Sometimes he wasn't so nice, but I used to tutor him in math, and then sometimes I'd babysit him at night.
So now, Bessie, your grandmother, moved in with you after Peter, her husband, died.
When I was 9 years old.
I had the impression that the apple of her eye was Peter.
No,
I mean, was Ben.
It was.
Yeah. So why did she move in with Dorothy and Harry and not with Ben?
Well, in the first place, Ben led the elegant lifestyle. Ben had God knows how many pairs of shoes and God knows how many custom-made shirts. Plus, he had these glamorous wives. Only two, but they were each, not at the same time, but they were each glamorous. And there would never have been any question about having her move in with him. I think he loved her, but he kind of put up with her. My mother, on the other hand, was totally devoted as a daughter. When Bessie and Peter, my grandparents, moved to New York, and they moved to New York because Ben had gone to Columbia Law School and decided to stay in New York. And my grandmother suddenly found it necessary to move out of Pittsburgh, where they'd lived all those years. She found it absolutely compelling that they moved to New York as well. So they did. And she moved to be near him, and my mother talked my father into selling his stores and moving to New York to be near her mother.
And how was it for your father when Bessie moved in? What was their relationship? That must be pretty hard.
Their relationship was not very good. They had all kinds of differences of opinion on values. My father was, work hard, certainly play by the rules, pay all your bills early. He was very proper. Now, my grandmother was proper, but in a different way, and she was a lot more extravagant. And then when my grandfather died, she had no income. He didn't really, I don't think he left very much insurance. So she became an extra financial burden. And my father had a word for her. There was a word in Yiddish that means mother-in-law. It's not a particularly complimentary word. It's not bad, but it's just pretty matter of fact. It's Schwieger. My Schwieger is my mother-in-law. And when you just said it that way, you knew that was not among the class of the person's most beloveds. So, but my grandmother, she I have to say, she pulled her own weight. She cooked and cleaned. She was a fabulous housekeeper. Her cooking was incredible. That's, I think, the reason I'm a good cook. Ruthie was a good cook. And even after I was married, Bessie adored David. We'll get into that when I talk about David. But she adored David, and once a week she used to come to wherever I lived with a shopping bag. And in the shopping bag she had her implements that she needed, including what in Yiddish is called stekshik. Stekshik are slippers, because she used to wear the stekshik while she cooked. But then as soon as she was finished, that she was, properly done up, made up, not schlumpy like me, and off went the stekshik. So having her move to us was a financial burden. And of course, there's the burden of having another person living in the house, especially when your wife is trying to make everything nice for them, but for you at the same time. So it's a good thing. Fortunately, my mother was a saint, so she was able to manage it all.
It's how I remember her as well. We'll get into it maybe separately, and maybe you can even show us a thing or two, but what are the main dishes that Bessie made that you...
Potato knishes that nobody in the world makes as she did anymore. They make them, but other people's are oily. The dough is a sort of phyllo dough, but she made it herself, and I still remember her stretching it. You put your hands under this mound of dough, and you stretch it by going like this very gently. You have to be careful, because if you tear it, It's no good.
Yeah.
So she used to make with a wonderful potato filling, and all of them quite beautiful, matching exactly. I remember how she cut them, and then how she would turn them on their sides and go like this, so that everyone, she was like a machine, had the imprint of the three fingers on top. So potato knishes that's something you can't duplicate. Chicken soup was wonderful. And of course, gefilte fish, which I was fortunate enough to learn because my grandmother, when I was 16, fell getting onto a streetcar and broke her arm. And it was Passover season. And so that was the dilemma. Not, are we going to have fish? That wasn't the dilemma. It was, who's going to make the fish? So I was elected. Betsy told me she would rather cook with me than with my mother. And I was chosen to make the fish. And I remember standing there. I mean, 16 is not that horrendous a long time. It's pretty long.
You have a good memory of being 16, sure.
And standing there and chopping that fish.
So it wasn't that she consciously set out to transmit the recipe to
No.
her granddaughter. It's just you had to learn, and so then you did.
Yeah.
Like Ruth didn't know how to make gefilte fish.
No, she didn't. She didn't.
Yeah.
She didn't get designated.
But no, but yet her daughter Lynn does know how. Is that, did you
Because her
teach
daughter Lynn has tried to learn. I did do some teaching, yes.
Now, as you've been telling these stories, you sprinkle a little bit of Yiddish, including some words I've never heard
You've
before.
never heard me use.
Yeah. Tell me about the presence of Yiddish in your household. You have the first language is English, yes?
Oh, yeah, everybody spoke English.
Yeah.
The only time they spoke Yiddish was...
And without an accent.
Oh, and without an accent.
Yeah.
The only time they spoke Yiddish was when they didn't want us to know what they were saying. You know, they'd end up the sentence with a little Yiddish word. So I never spoke any Yiddish.
How conversant were your parents in it?
They
would
were
you say?
conversant. My father could read and write Yiddish.
Did he? He read some Yiddish?
Yes, and he taught my mother how to read Yiddish. My mother knew how to speak it, but I mean, my mother was 4 or 5 months old when she came to this country, so she was basically her first language was English. But she was fluent in Yiddish, but we didn't speak any Yiddish.
What about Bessie?
Bessie would speak Yiddish sometime to my mother, but mostly it was English.